So, hi, Mom. This is Teresa Farrell, and I'm interviewing my mother, Doris Montgomery Hofer Sullivan, in her 92nd year. And we're going back to her childhood. My sister Carolyn is visiting from Kansas City and joining us today, Mom, right? So she may have some questions for you. And last time we left off, were you early childhood and going to school, your school years and winters in Arkansas, and living as a small child, what you remembered. I want to carry on from there, your early school years and everything, and talk more about those days. So first, second grade, going to school. How big was your classroom?
Very small. It was just a small country school. And they probably had maybe 3 or 4 students in each class, and it went from first grade through the 12th.
Do you have any questions?
No, that's great. So they were all in one room? The teacher taught everything?
2 rooms. It was a 2-story. And the upper grades from the 8th grade up was upstairs, and the rest were down.
Okay. So what was the setup? I mean, did you have your own desk, or did you have your own books? Or
They were the 2 student desks. They were like today's desk, except that they were double.
Okay.
And you had a seat partner that you seat with.
Mm-hmm.
And so we usually had our siblings that we sit with, except I was the youngest one at that time of the children going to school.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a little playmate that sit with me.
So you must have been really young, because Aunt Joy was just 2 years behind you, and so you were like 5 or so, 5 or 6.
I started school when I was 5.
Okay.
I had a birthday in November, so I was 6 through the 1st grade.
Okay.
And the only years that I had in school back in Arkansas before we moved was 3 years, in my 3rd year.
Okay.
And so the children, the school months were different than they are today. For the
What were they?
in the early spring,
Mm-hmm.
and then they didn't have any school through the late spring during the planting time,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the fall when the harvest. So it's between the harvest and the planting
Okay.
that they had the school months.
Now I get a little confused because your grandfather, he had the farm, he had the family farm and everything, but he also had a job, right? He worked at the lumber mill, I know, in Louisiana as a foreman, and he also worked as an engineer. Or how did that all? I mean, those early years, was he home? Was he not home?
He was home most of the time when I was quite small.
Okay.
And when I got to be school age, he had jobs, and he was well known for his expertise in engineering and logging, which was the industry at that part of the country, was
Right.
logging. So in the winter time, when they weren't doing anything, they did a lot of logging.
Okay.
And he was foreman of a company in Louisiana. And in the springtime, late spring, when they had harvest time, then he had a job harvesting through Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, and Texas.
Mm-hmm.
That was in the fall.
And that was in the late spring, well, really in the summertime when they did the harvest. And then he'd be home to do the planting for the taking care of the field and plowing everything, helping the boys. And so that was our cash flow that we had. I remember. And
so he was gone a lot, really.
he was gone part of the
year.
part of each year. Yeah. And that was hard on Mother but she had everything under control.
But she did.
And she had good help with my older siblings, taking care of all of us young ones. And so we just had, I don't remember any sadness in my growing up years.
Do you remember how long he would be gone or whatever, or when he'd come home? What would you do?
He would come home for weekends.
Okay.
And transportation, I guess, was pretty cheap on the train.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he had a pass, I don't know. He was the engineer on the train, when he met my mother.
Mm-hmm.
So he may have had a pass on the train. But he come home on weekends, a lot of weekends.
But that was good to see him, huh?
Yeah, it was. I can remember him walking up the road from the train, where the train stopped at Patrick. And he'd have one of us in each arm and one on his back, walking. We'd meet him in the road and he'd walk us up to the house. He was a very loving dad. We were very close to him. And the last trip, he and Mother had a place on a log down beyond the back fence of our farm.
You want to take a sip, Mom?
They used to go there on the night before they left and went over all their aspirations for us kids and all the problems that crop up while he's gone. And on this last trip, she told me all about it. They talked about that it was, Dad knew that, and I don't know how he knew the economy was going to explode, because it was just before the crash.
The depression.
Crash. That was
market crash. And they were going to take us to either Kansas or Nebraska. And he had fell in love. He was a farmer from A to Z. He loved farming. And he had fell in love with wheat farming. And that was their plans. This was going to be his last trip, and he was logging in Louisiana. He had been home different weekends while he was down there, because they wanted to build up a cash flow to be able, to move us. And
so that was, what month was that in 1929? His last trip.
That was in, the last time I saw him was in February or March.
Okay.
And then we got word that he had had an accident, logging accident. He was checking the logs on the logging truck, and one of the log chains warped on him or broke, and threw the legs askew and threw him off, and the logs followed, rolled on top of him. So that was a sad time. That was a year from March when he died until we left the following March. Then we left and went to Kansas because Mother had a sister and a brother and their families that lived in Hutchinson, Kansas. So that's why we moved to Kansas. And Thelma got married the night before we left because she was.
Well, let's go back, and I want to go back more about grandfather's death.
Okay.
And how we found out about it, and the funeral, and how they did that in those days. All those details. I want to know more about that. I know you were what? You were like, how old were you? Like 8?
I was.
You're third
7.
grade.
I was 7.
7. Okay.
Yes. When he was killed, and word come down by train. They had a daily train that went back and forth from Louisiana, and they found out that way. And of course, Mother then went down to check with the company and all. And so the company didn't carry any insurance back there.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, they didn't have any insurance on any of their men. So all she could do was bring his clothes home and his body
Mm-hmm.
back. And so they took care of the body in Louisiana and shipped it by train back to Patrick, where he was interred at Patrick.
Did they bring his body to the house, or was he in a?
They went to, they took it to my great-grandfather, no, my grandfather, his dad and stepmother's house. And so that's where he laid for memorials. The people could come and go, you know, and see. And then he was taken over by Hearst to the cemetery, where my grandfather had bought a plot that held 5 or 6 grave sites, and so Papa was put in. He was the first one interred in that plot. And
So did he die before his brother, his half brother?
yes,
Oh, he did. I didn't know that. Okay. Okay.
and so we had the farm sale
Mm-hmm.
and sold all the implements and everything. We couldn't.
Why don't we take a break, okay, because we're close to 20 minutes. I want to keep these at no more than 20 minutes because they get kind of long. So let's take a break, and then we'll talk more about the aftermath after the funeral and that whole year before you moved, because I imagine that was a lot of upheaval for you, too. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.